here. Where does the time go? I currently serve on the AWAC Collaboration Committee, and the purpose of this committee is really to bring together people of our industry to talk about topics of interest and support one another. And it is graciously supported by the AWAC Collaboration Committee, the Animal Assistance Foundation, and the Colorado Humane Society. Just a couple quick housekeeping items if you're just joining us. Again, as you're coming aboard, if you could put your name and your organization name in the chat. You could also put your name and org name in your ID on your Zoom. And we will be recording today's session, not the breakouts though, just the presentation. And then as this great speaker is presenting today, if you can put your questions as they come up in the moment in the chat, and then there will be some time at the end to have interaction with our great guest speaker today with those questions. And again, thank you for being here. And I am going to pass it on to Jennifer Schwartz, and she is going to introduce our topic and our speaker.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Schwartz. I'm the Director of Human Resources for Foothills Animal Shelter, and I'm also a member of the Collaboration Committee. And I am so thrilled and honored, really, to be able to introduce Kristen Gallus, our volunteer program manager at Foothills Animal Shelter. She will be our content expert this morning. And Kristen was a volunteer for Foothills Animal Shelter for 5 years before becoming the volunteer program manager in 2017. She has degrees in English and secondary education from Valparaiso University and a master's degree in liberal studies from Hamline University. Before entering the animal welfare profession, she taught high school in St. Paul, Minnesota for 15 years. And I have to say, I think her teaching experience was so great and so crucial to how, what a fantastic volunteer manager that she is for Foothills. And I'm excited for all of you to hear from Kristen this morning. So Kristen, I'm going to hand it on over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Right, and make sure, can everyone see my screen right now? Not yet. Okay, how about now?
Yes, that.
And Anne, can you see?
Yeah. No.
Okay.
If you want to try again, I have stopped sharing my screen, so you should be able to now.
Oh, okay, great. Let me get back to there. Okay, 1 second here. Okay, can you see it now?
Nope. Whatever you did before, I think you're good now.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. I think perfect. Okay, great. So thank you and welcome everyone. I'm honored to have so many people coming to this presentation, and I truly hope that you will have at least one good takeaway by the end of the session, if not more. And before I jump in, I just wanted to start. I know Jennifer just gave you a little bit of my background, and the reason why I wanted to start there was because I thought after volunteering at Foothills for 5 years, and actually volunteering for many years before that, with everything from equine rescue to reading books for the blind to teaching English as a second language, I thought all that volunteer experience and then my teaching experience was going to make my transition to becoming a volunteer manager easy. And boy, was I wrong. I was very surprised those first few months at how different it was to manage adults who could leave at any moment, as opposed to adolescents who were forced by law to attend my classes. So what I found when I first started was that I had a very steep learning curve, and I just started reading every book I could on managing people and volunteering. I went to every webinar, seminar, conference, everything I could to try to get up to speed. And so what I'm going to present today is really a combination of everything that I've learned formally, and then also what has worked for me informally. And some of you who've been managing volunteers for a while may recognize a couple of the slides in my presentation. And I also hope that you will find new information as well. So I just wanted to start with a little bit of context before I jumped in. So great. So what I want to focus on today really is creating a first impression with new volunteers. I can't overemphasize how important those first moments of contact are with new volunteers, and how I think they can lay a really strong groundwork to not only engage volunteers and retain them, but also prevent and manage conflict in the future too. So that's where I'm going to start with. You're going to hear me say the word connections a lot, because I truly think with volunteers, the quicker and the more authentic of a connection you can make, the better just about everything goes. So those will be things you'll hear me mention today a couple times. But before I jump into that, I want to give you the context of where I'm coming from and the situation at Foothills Animal Shelter, because I know as I'm sharing ideas, some of them may be easier to implement, or may speak to you or resonate with you more than others. But I think it'll be helpful to know what my context is. So right now we have 312 shelter volunteers at Foothills, supporting about 58 different roles. So the volunteers do support every team in the shelter right now. In addition, we have usually about 10 to 12 court-ordered community service volunteers. And then we have, I checked this morning, 199 foster volunteers in addition. So for managing the shelter and community service volunteers, we have one full-time manager, myself, and then I have a full-time coordinator. And then for our foster volunteers, we have 2 full-time coordinators. So my coordinator and I work 4-10s, and we cover 7 days a week. We are there before the first volunteers arrive, which tends to be around 7:30. And then we're there when the last volunteers arrive, which tends to be around 3. So we try very hard to cover every shift and every day of the week so that the volunteers do have one of us there supporting them. Just an idea of how engaged our volunteers were last year. 137 logged 8 or more hours a month. We require a minimum of 6 right now. 22 volunteers logged over 25 hours a month. 26 logged fewer than 6 hours a month. They were grandfathered in after COVID, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And then we had 5 volunteers that logged over 400 hours a month. So the grand total ended up being almost 32,000 hours, which equates 15 full-time employees. So that just gives you a sense of what our program looks like. And let me get the next one here. Okay. And then just to give you a sense of the demographics of our volunteers, we this year have started shifting quite a bit younger than we have been in the past. In the past, I would say the bulk of our volunteers were between 50 and probably 75. And we have started shifting quite a bit younger. We have quite a few more 16 to 25-year-olds and quite a few more really 30 to 40-year-olds. There are some benefits, of course, to every demographic. Since most of our dogs, for our dog walkers, tend to be young, strong, enthusiastic, it is nice to have some younger volunteers. However, the younger volunteers also probably don't stay as long because they're in a busy time of life where they are, changing jobs, moving out of state, starting families. And so we don't maybe keep them as long as our older volunteers, but we still greatly benefit from their help. The sweet spot, I'd say, for us tends to be people that have just retired and have some extra time on their hands, and they are looking for a way to connect and get a routine back into their weeks. So I tend to be particularly excited when we get newly retired volunteers, but again, there's a benefit to every level of demographic. What we require of our volunteers is they have to be at least 16 years of age. We have 2 resources I asked them to read, an essential capabilities document, which talks about there are a lot of safety issues, of course, in animal welfare. And so the essential capabilities kind of talk through that. And then we have an About Our Volunteers resource that focuses more on cultural fit and what our expectations are. We ask them to make a 6-month commitment with a weekly regular shift. And then I also say, which ends up being about 6 to 8 hours a month. They watch a 13-minute online orientation quiz video and then take a quiz afterwards. They complete an application, a criminal background check. We ask them to watch a 4-hour fear-free shelters training. And that all happens before we actually meet them in person. So what I have found is by the time we get to the actual in-person classroom training, the volunteers that have jumped through all of those hoops up to that point tend to be pretty committed. And so by the time they get to where we're meeting them in person, we have a pretty good group of volunteers that are invested, but also have a pretty good idea of what our expectations are. So then we do an hour training for cats, an hour and a half training for dogs. Immediately following the training, they do an hour mentor session per species. They then meet with myself or my coordinator for about 15 minutes just to solidify the schedule. They get their t-shirt and name tag. And then there's additional staff training for our kennel cleaners and some of our other roles. So that gives you kind of an idea of what we ask of our volunteers before they start. So first impressions, again, I can't emphasize enough how important first impressions are. And I try to think of that first impression as beginning from that very first email that I received, from the very first contact, to try to be as welcoming and as organized and as clear as possible. I try to design the application to capture information that describes the volunteer's motivation for coming to our organization so that I have an idea of what roles will be a good fit for them. Before orientation, I send them an email. Our community room, which is where we do our training, tends to be a little chilly. And so I send an email just mentioning that it might be a little cold, you might want to layer. If you're hoping to work with dogs, please wear closed-toed shoes. We recommend you wear long pants. Just kind of trying to anticipate what their physical needs might be, but also setting expectations as well, so that they're starting off really on the right foot. I then greet each volunteer at orientation in person. And some volunteers are so excited. They tend to be early birds, and sometimes they arrive, 30 minutes early. And so I try to be ready as early, before the first early bird arrives. And as I'm waiting for them, I review their applications, and I'm looking for something in the application that I can retain and then use to connect with them right off the bat, so that when they first walk into the community room, they tell me their name, and then I hopefully have something that I can say, oh, yes, you used to volunteer at an animal shelter in Texas, is that right? Or something that makes them feel connected right away, so that they know that I see them as like an individual and not just one of 300 volunteers. I do ask them to wear a name tag at orientation, and then I try to, as subtly as possible, say their name out loud while I'm looking at their face. I'm a visual learner, so the more I can say their name as I'm looking at their face, the easier it is for me to then retain the name and learn it long term. And then I always try to make sure their physical needs are met at the very beginning by showing them where the bathrooms are, having food available, mentioning that they're welcome to get up and move as needed throughout the presentation, just so that they can then focus on the information provided. So, okay. So when I'm looking for the motivations in the application for volunteering, this helps me get a sense of what role might ultimately be a good fit. Most of our volunteers on board with the idea of either dog walking or kennel cleaning. And for kennel cleaning, that could be for dogs, cats, or SMAM. And I tend to find a lot of the dog walkers, and I'm making some generalizations here, but tend to fit under the I benefit motivation. Often on the applications, you'll see motivations like, I'm in between dogs, or I'm living in an apartment, and so I can't have a dog right now. I'm looking for my next dog, or I'm hoping to get my steps in, fitness. So of course, they are also benefiting the shelter and the animals, of course. But I see a lot of primary motivation as ways that they also are benefiting, which is fine, which is great. With the motivation, I make it better. That's where I tend to see maybe the kennel cleaners. So they're going to be willing to do things that maybe aren't as initially as popular as dog walking, right? They're willing to get dirty and they're willing to do the roles that we truly, truly need every day. As far as I belong motivation, again, the people that have recently retired and are missing having that social connection and that sense of structure in their life, they tend to fall under the I belong motivation, which is really helpful because then I know they might be people that are interested in kennel guiding or our public facing roles like the front desk, or just people, they may be more people as well as animal people. And then the fourth motivation, I lead. So those are more volunteers you're going to have to get to know and see that natural leadership instinct. You know, some leaders can't help but lead. That's just who they are. And as soon as you start to identify that, as you get to know them, those are going to be your mentors, again, kennel guides. They're going to be volunteers you can have new staff shadow or new volunteer shadow. So I think it's really helpful to know why volunteers are coming to your organization so that you can help meet their needs as well as the needs of your organization. Okay, so we've gotten through orientation. Now it's the first shift, and I tend to be very hands-on with the first shift. Of course, provide the role guidelines ahead of time, especially for the volunteers that are a little nervous or uncomfortable that first shift. It really helps, I think, reassure them if they have something written that they can review before the shift. In addition, it helps with consistency, of course, among volunteers as well. I touch base with the trainer, the staff trainer, or the veteran volunteer before the new volunteer arrives, just to make sure that they're prepared, that they have the supplies they need, the name of the volunteer that they will be supporting or training, and just make sure everything is ready so that when that volunteer arrives and they're a little bit nervous and they don't want to mess up and they're trying to remember everything they learned in training, I think it really helps if the staff or veteran volunteer is already prepared and ready for them. I try to be waiting for them before they arrive, only for their first shift, just so that they see a familiar face and I can guide them to the person that they'll be spending at least the first part of that first shift with training. I also check to see, are they wearing their t-shirt? Do they have a name tag? With our dog walkers and dog kennel cleaners, do they have a treat bag? And if not, I provide one right away because I'm trying to set expectations as early as possible regarding what we really want our volunteers to be, how we want them to be prepared. So again, trying to establish that connection. And then I do take a photo of them, and you can see Owen's photo here during that first shift. And I do frame it as a first day of school picture. And that tends to kind of soften them up a little bit because that's kind of what it feels like. It kind of feels like the first day of school when you're a little bit nervous and you're afraid you're not going to know anybody and you're going to screw up. And I think that kind of helps because then they can kind of remember, oh yeah, I survived a lot of first days of school. I can survive this too. It also helps to have the photo. I put it in Vulgistics, which is the database we use, because then it helps me learn names. And in addition, the staff can also come to me if they're looking for a volunteer, and we've got that photo right there. And then I do try to check in at least once during the shift, just lightly, just to kind of make sure that everything seems like it's going well, you know. So then after the first shift, then I kind of back off because, you know, a lot of our volunteers are, well, they're all here for the animals, and a lot of them can be more introverted, and they really do want to just focus on the animals. So after orientation and that first shift, when I'm very hands-on, then I really kind of back off. I do try to check in at least once during the shift just to make sure everything's going okay. Plus, again, I'm always looking for leaders, people, so that I have an idea of who might be a good fit for other roles. After 3 months of volunteering, I send a survey to gather feedback as early as possible to see if there are any issues that need to be addressed. And then I do send a quarterly newsletter to the volunteers and staff with the photos, those first day of school photos with all of the volunteers to help the staff learn them. And I try to highlight the impact and engagement of our volunteers by listing the hours logged and the FTE equivalent, because this not only makes the volunteers feel valued and valuable, but it's also a nice way to kind of sell the program to the staff as well. So speaking of staff, my next few slides are going to be some of the training that I do with new staff. At Foothills, we have a new staff orientation day where every member of every team in the organization presents information to our brand new staff, and that includes the volunteer department as well. So when I present to the staff, I talk about how important it is to acknowledge and appreciate volunteers, how important it is to be prepared and to communicate. And then I break it down and try to make it more concrete. So with regard to acknowledging and appreciating, I really try to focus on the use of names. And I tell the staff the difference between saying good morning and good morning, Anna, makes a huge difference. Like when you hear your name, you feel seen, right? You feel like an individual. All of a sudden, you're no longer one of 300. You are Anna, right? Or Debbie. So I try to emphasize to the staff as much as possible, use names. Our volunteers are very good about wearing their name tags. And I tell the staff, feel free to look at the name tag and then look back at their face. They don't mind. They know you don't have 300 people memorized. Use those name tags, it still makes a difference, even if you're reading it off a name tag. And then I say, every chance you get, use their names, and also wear your name tag too, because volunteers really appreciate, especially the staff that they work with on a regular basis, knowing their names. So then I say, okay, that's the basic, right? Saying thank you, good morning, and using the name. Then if you want to take it to the next level, right? This is where you get kind of a gold star. Use their name, thank them, and then if possible, thank them for a specific behavior, right? Be as concrete as possible. And then talk about the impact of that behavior. And that's where it really makes a difference to the volunteer, because they really do feel seen and valued. So I have some examples at the bottom here where it says, Barb, thank you for fixing the surgery pack situation. This freed the staff to focus on a complicated surgery. So you can see you're thanking, using the name, and then getting really focused on what they're thanking them for, right? It's not just a blanket thank you. It's a thank you for something very specific. And I'm very sorry, the sun is all of a sudden in my eyes. So I have to look down at here we go. I should have put down my blinds before I started. Okay. As far as recognition and appreciation, we have a variety of things we do throughout the year. But what I hear on our yearly survey time and time again is that the most important appreciation that has the biggest impact is the informal day-to-day, just the thank yous or the connecting one-on-one seems to have the greatest impact. But we do have other ways that we recognize as well. I do send a weekly newsletter called the Midweek Squeak that just provides, safety reminders, new staff that have joined the team. And we have an adoption spotlight. So probably one of our longest term dogs and cats that got adopted. And then the quarterly newsletter I mentioned before. We recognize volunteers of the month. We do it by role. Pre-COVID, I used to do an individual each month, but then we could only recognize 12. So now we recognize them by role. So it'll be January, we're recognizing the dog kennel cleaners, and we put each of their photos on a whiteboard. We do handwritten thank yous that the team that works with the dog kennel cleaners write. And I have liked transitioning to by role because I think it emphasizes the sense of team between the volunteers within a role, as opposed to just recognizing one person. We have a shout out board and a gratitude box so that volunteers and staff can recognize each other. We emphasize thank you notes to the staff, and our staff does a pretty good job of writing those. After a volunteer has done 1,000 hours of service within a 5-year period, or after they've been with us 10 years, we give them a platinum volunteer jacket that you can see in the slide Tony's holding up. We do birthday e-cards. We also meet with each team in the shelter once a month, or each month we meet with a team, and we have donuts and coffee, and the volunteers are able to ask that team whatever questions they want. So it's kind of a nice way for them to get to know the staff. And then I also do swag twice a year for Volunteer Appreciation Week, and then at the holiday time too. Okay, so then again, this is still the staff part of the presentation. I emphasize to the staff to be as prepared as possible and make sure you have your supplies ready and that you're ready to go. I know sometimes for staff, it can feel time consuming to train volunteers, but research has shown that 1 hour of training can reap 10 to 15 hours of service. And I think it's actually quite a bit higher than that. And I think once staff realizes that investing a little bit of time at the beginning can really provide a lot of support, they definitely don't mind. And then I talk about communication, and to communicate, I don't think you can over communicate personally. I tell the staff as much as possible, if there are changes in the routine or the SOP, make sure that I know and my coordinator knows so that we can make sure the volunteers are up to date. I really emphasize to the staff to not talk negatively, even if they're having a bad day and they need to vent, venting can be so beneficial and helpful, but not to volunteers, right? Like vent to your coworker who has a better sense of context and the big picture of animal welfare, as opposed to a volunteer who really doesn't have that sense of context. I always say, let's keep this as the volunteer's happy place as much as possible so that they don't have to take on the heavier stuff that sometimes staff do. And then every fall, I meet with every role, and including the staff that manages that role, just to touch base and gather feedback, answer questions, update the SOPs. I do those virtually so that I can record them and send them to anybody who can't attend. And that tends to be a nice way to also touch base and just make sure everybody is doing well. Okay, so challenging behaviors, they occur sometimes. I do truly believe that the more of a connection and relationship you have built, it helps mitigate challenging behaviors, because if you've built up that sense of trust, it just makes dealing with things that can be frustrating a little bit easier. A couple of causes of challenging behavior might be a lack of knowledge, a change in SOPs, the volunteer misunderstood the rules or forgot the procedures, and that tends to be fairly solvable, because then you can just get the volunteer back on the same page again and hopefully move forward. I'd say personal obstacles can be one of the largest causes of challenging behavior for us as staff. Time constraints, job, family can lead to unreliability, which can be hard. Last minute cancellations. We do require a weekly regular shift of our volunteers, but often volunteers will come to us and say, I just can't do the same day every week. Can I switch to an SOS type situation where they respond? I send SOS emails whenever we need more dog walkers or kennel cleaners. And so that can be challenging, especially for us as staff, the reliability piece. Another cause of challenging behavior might be relational miscommunication, or assumptions can sometimes be challenging. A volunteer might disagree with the change. I try to mitigate this one by communicating changes as early as possible, always including the reason for the change and connecting that to the mission. As long as you can connect the change to a benefit to the animals, then changes tend to be accepted, I think, a little bit more readily. Sometimes unclear boundaries or volunteers get overly invested, especially if they are at the shelter, 3 or 4 days a week. They can sometimes get too invested, and that's when you might see compassion fatigue or compassion stress occur. So I always try to keep a lookout. Really, I don't think there should be any reason for a volunteer to experience compassion fatigue or stress, because they should be able to take breaks or manage their schedule in such a way that helps alleviate that, ideally. Okay. Sometimes from a staff perspective, conflict can occur if volunteers start to feel like a bit of a burden, you know, especially if they feel as though the time they invest in training isn't, they don't feel like they have the time for it, right? They feel like that time isn't well spent. You can sometimes get into challenges in that sense of not feeling like a team. And so I try as much as possible to make sure staff and volunteers do feel like they're part of the same team, so that the staff recognizes the values of the volunteers and the volunteers recognize just how hardworking the staff is. Okay. Then there's this whole nother realm of conflict that can occur just based on personalities. And I got this information from Dana Litwin, and I would say if any of you are able to take her webinar, that's Hold 'em or Fold 'em, How to Inspire, Move, or Fire Challenging Volunteers, please take the opportunity. It is excellent. And she really focuses on how to very specifically, concretely manage specific personalities that we may find. The heroes, I believe Dana actually calls firefighters. They tend to be volunteers that are always looking for fires to put out so that they can then, you know, kind of get that sense of being a hero. And then she recommends you acknowledge and appreciate them, but not too much so that you don't encourage the searching for more fires, if you will. Sometimes you might get a personality that's a little bit entitled, right? Sometimes volunteers have a very high opinion of their value, which is good, but occasionally that can become a little bit challenging, and you have to set very strong boundaries with those volunteers. You may have volunteers who are truly experts. You know, we're fortunate, and I imagine many of your organizations are too, where we have a lot of retired nurses and vet techs and doctors and people that have medical knowledge, or trainers. We get dog trainers sometimes. And so I always look for the easy wins so that I can appreciate their knowledge and also try to keep them like within the same mission and moving toward the same goal. Some volunteers have a higher threat threshold, can be a bit conspiratorial, where the assumptions tend to be negative. Like if an animal is no longer on the website, instead of assuming the animal was adopted or went to foster, they say, was the animal euthanized? You know, like going to sort of the worst case scenario. And so with that personality type, I try really hard to just stick with the facts and do not personalize their sense of threat. Dramarama, you might have some volunteers that just can't help but stir up a little bit of drama, right? That could be some of our people who get a little too involved with the people. Again, really clear boundaries and making sure they're in the right role is important. And then you might have volunteers who would fall under the category of rebels, where they're not really rule followers. And so they're the dog walkers that want to come 15 minutes early or just want to do things their own way. And with them, I really try to focus on, are they accomplishing the mission? Are there any safety issues? If not, I try to be as flexible as possible or find them a more flexible role to avoid conflict or challenges with that personality type. So again, shout out to Dana Litwin. If you ever have a chance to take that, it's an hour seminar, it's excellent. And it's really very helpful. So just touching lightly on the difference between intent and impact, that our volunteers are going to tend to have the best intent, right? They're here to help animals, and their intention is going to be really positive, but sometimes the impact on the organization or the staff is not positive. And so you have to, it's important to know the intention, because that will help you be as empathetic as possible. And know their motivation and avoid creating stories in your mind about why this action is occurring. But you still have to address the impact, you know, on staff and on the organization. But I always try to allow volunteers and staff to save face and retain dignity as much as possible, since we all are all there for the same really good reason with animal welfare. So, okay. So when these situations happen, and they do tend to happen often with new volunteers because there is so much to learn at first, as much as possible, try to address challenging situations in the moment. in the moment, because what tends to happen is a staff member may come and say, hey, this is what I saw happen in the hallway. Could you address it? And then by the time you address it, enough time has passed that in that volunteer's mind, that is not the way they remember that moment in the hallway as occurring. So it's so much easier if you can address things in the moment, because then you have whatever the situation or the action is right in front of you, and it can be addressed on a much more concrete, specific level. Always, whenever possible, try to focus on the problem that's occurring, of course, not the person, and try to offer support as much as possible. So for example, if a dog is just really enthusiastic and it's jumping up and it's pulling on the leash, and the volunteer's like shortening the leash too much and it's not helping, jackpotting treats on the floor, trying to redirect the dog's behavior, doing something to just address the actual situation right away so that the volunteer can see, oh, that worked. Okay. And then they start to relax, and then they don't feel like it's their fault as a dog handler, but it was just they didn't have the right tool in their toolbox at that moment. So I really find, as much as possible, addressing things in the moment really, really helps. I asked the staff too to always discuss any notable volunteer interactions with us, because we're always looking for patterns, and it's really helpful to know if, say, a volunteer is having kind of an off day, or if there is a pattern of maybe more negative energy that's being established, then you're going to address it differently depending on the situation. I always think of conflicts as opportunities, right? Opportunities for connection, opportunities for education, and just try not to, as much as possible, like the more you can be involved and handle conflicts and uncomfortable situations, the easier and easier they get. So that's one piece of advice I would have. I like to think of the difference between feedback and feed forward, because feedback to a volunteer tends to focus on the past. It can tend to be a bit negative. It's limited and static because the situation already occurred. It's focused on the problem, as opposed to focusing on the future, because we can still impact the future. We can help people become right next time or do better next time, as opposed to focusing on what went wrong. So whenever possible, I try to focus on that. And then a way to do that, a way to focus on the feed forward model, is to describe the concrete behavior as concretely and concisely as possible, connect it to the impact, and then focus on the future. So next time this will happen, right? So if a volunteer is struggling with the dog that is playing tug of war with the leash, saying, if you have a leash on you, which we tend to, clipping that second leash to the dog and showing the volunteer, if you have 2 leashes and that dog's playing tug of war, they can just keep that leash, and that's fine, and you still have a leash. And then next time, if you have a leash in your treat bag or on your person, and this behavior occurs again, you'll be prepared. So kind of focusing on what you can do the next time it happens, I think can be really helpful. Okay. This is one of those like simple but not easy recommendations, I think, sometimes, depending on what it is you're actively listening to. But I do think just listening to whatever the volunteer's challenge is can make all the difference, because so often they just really want to be heard, right? They even if you don't have to in that moment provide a solution, just listening, I think, can make such a difference. As we know, validating with eye contact and nodding can be incredibly helpful. And we can always show interest, even if we don't necessarily agree with the point of view. Just listening often makes that connection. But let's say you've tried everything and it just isn't going well. Then my last fallback is this acronym LAST, where, okay, you tried listening and it's not going where you want. Then I always think apologizing and thanking can build bridges so quickly. And you're not apologizing for, you're not like owning to a mistake, you're apologizing for the miscommunication. You're apologizing that the volunteer is feeling a certain way. And then always thanking them for coming in, and thanking them for just being willing to give their time, but also come to you and communicate. There are so many things we can thank them for. And I do think that will help build bridges, especially if you're in a situation that is particularly challenging. Okay, so my last slide, I just wanted to touch lightly on retention, because I think sometimes we can get kind of caught up in our retention numbers a little bit. And I think it's important to remember that not all volunteers are the right fit for our organization. And it's okay if a volunteer isn't the right fit and decides to leave or needs to be released. That's perfectly okay. What we really want to do is retain the volunteers that are, enriching the culture of the organization and are reliable and invested and moving the organization in the right direction. And if you do have a volunteer who just for a variety of reasons isn't the best fit and has to leave, that's okay. Sometimes that actually benefits the organization more than trying to keep that individual, because we're so focused on retention. Okay, so that is my last slide. And I'm looking forward to the breakout sessions and questions. So
thank you so much, Kristen. That was fantastic.
Great.
We do know that people are going to have questions. And so what we're going to do, we're going to go to the breakout sessions in just a moment here. So everyone on the call is going to be assigned to a group. We have 4 questions for you all that we'd love for you to discuss within your group. And there will be a collaboration committee member in each group to help facilitate that. I just put the questions in the chat, but your facilitator should also have those. And then we're going to come back together after 20 minutes and we're going to get to, we're going to report out some great ideas, and then we're going to get to ask Kristen all of our questions. So don't go anywhere, and you'll get assigned to a chat room in just a moment.
Yes, I will bring us all out to our rooms quickly. I just wanted to let you know a few of our committee members had to step off. So if you don't have one of us in your rooms, you got this. So we will see you all back in 20 minutes.
process don't complete it, or any feedback on sort of that level of interaction and requirements?
Yes, yes. So prior to COVID, prior to the shutdown, I had fewer hoops, and I would onboard quite a few more volunteers and do it like kind of every other month. And then I found what I was doing was spending a lot of time and energy bringing on people who didn't stay, who weren't engaged, who maybe just weren't as focused on the same, mission, or weren't willing to do what we needed, I think. So I started building more hoops into the program, and I found that as I narrowed the funnel, I would get fewer volunteers through the process, but the ones that I did get through the process were gold. They would log hours and be willing to do the things we really needed, like dog kennel cleaning and dog walking. So I find I right now at this moment in time, I like having too many maybe hoops, just because then the group that I end up getting, even if it's smaller, they're just more engaged, they're more plugged in, and so then I'm not spending as much time trying to manage. There were always so many emails before COVID, like, oops, you didn't hit your 6 hours. Oops, you didn't hit, haven't seen you in a while. I don't have to spend time on that anymore, because by the time they get through the process, we know what we're getting, that they're really going to be plugged in and engaged. So you have fewer volunteers, but they give more to the organization, if that makes sense.
Cool. And just along that vein, the 6 hours a month, has that been a requirement for a while, or is that new?
Yeah. No, that's been a requirement for the while, because I figure if you're doing a weekly regular shift, that's probably going to be between 6 to 8 hours. People are going to go on vacation. They're going to get sick, right? They're going to need to take time off. And I like having that 6-hour requirement, because then it encourages volunteers to pick up an extra shift if they have to cancel their weekly regular shift for whatever reason. So they can't come on Wednesday, but they'll pick up a Friday because they want to make sure they get their 6 hours in that month. And it has tended to work out pretty well overall.
For my own question, what is the shortest shift that you can do, and do you know the average sort of shift that people take?
Yes, average shifts tend to be about 2 hours. The shortest shift is our kibble care role, which is feeding the dogs in the afternoon, and that shift tends to be an hour. Some volunteers stay a little bit later, but it tends to be about an hour, and that would be our shortest shift. But most of them tend to be about 2 hours for kennel cleaning, dog walking, and the kind of basic roles.
Cool. You talked a little bit about determining a volunteer's motivations. What kind of questions are you asking, or what kind of, how are you seeking that information?
Yes, so in the application, I ask why they're volunteering. I also ask if they have volunteered in the past, what they liked about their volunteer experience, and what they found challenging about their volunteer experience. Most volunteers are going to say their motivation for volunteering are the animals. So you don't get much out of that question. But when you ask them if they volunteered before, what they enjoyed and what they found challenging, that's when you start to really get information you can unpack and start to figure out what their motivation is. Plus, I think seeing where they volunteered also helps you get a sense of whether they are more extroverted or introverted, and kind of what their motivation is, basically.
We also talked a little bit about this idea of sort of releasing volunteers, or firing, or what does that process look for you guys? Is there a process in terms of a 3-strike rule, those types of things, or is it really conversation over time?
Yes, it's more like conversational. It's more trying to find a role that's a better fit for them, because that tends to be the where I start. Where if you're having problems, it's probably not the right role, right? So if I can find another role that fits their motivation better, I think that really helps. And then if that still is an issue, we do have a formal process, like a performance improvement plan. I've only had to use it, I want to say twice in 7 years, because I think conversationally, volunteers will self-select themselves out. Like if things aren't going well, they feel it, they know it, they don't like that either. And if the new role doesn't help, if the conversations don't help, probably 99% of the time they will, they'll leave. Which is easier than having to go through a performance improvement plan. But and there are a couple times where something has happened that was so egregious that we just had to release them without a performance improvement plan. Again, that's only happened a couple times in the past 7 years, but every once in a while it does.
Can you talk a little bit about this idea of feed forward?
Sure. Yes. I like to focus on like what to do next time, because we have these incident reports. I'm sure you all do too. If an animal breaks the skin, or if they bump their head or they slip on the ice, and then we fill it out together. And on the back of the incident report, there are a number of questions that I really do think fall under the umbrella of feed forward, because it's sort of like, okay, so what will you do next time? Or how could this have been prevented? How will it be prevented in the future? What could you do next time? And it really is focusing on how to avoid, in the summer, it's scratches, right? I mean, 90% of the incident reports are cat scratches and dog scratches. So it's a lot of conversations about maybe you could wear sleeves, right? Or, throw treats on the ground to redirect the animal that's, coming towards you. So I really, I just think the more you focus on a better tomorrow, the happier they're going to be, as opposed to focusing on what already happened and making them feel like because as you all probably, volunteers tend to come and say it was all my fault when it was with a scratch or a bite, or they already feel that, they do. So then it's a matter of focusing on, okay, so next time, how do we prevent it?
Sure. This is something that we've experienced as well, and I'm sure that many of us in the room have, is sort of volunteer engagement on social media.
Yes.
And do you
Yes.
have, policy rules?
Yes.
What are the expectations of
Yes.
volunteers when engaging with social media?
Yes. So we have a closed volunteer Facebook group, and there is a post that never leaves at the very start of this group with all of our guidelines and expectations. And then I and my coordinator have to approve every post before it can go through. And that's huge. That's key. It doesn't take very long, because you're going to identify the 1 or 2 volunteers who you have to really kind of keep an eye on, right? Most of the posts you can just approve, and then you're like, oh, I'm going to have to focus on this one a little bit more. We have a volunteer that does a lot of videos when he walks dogs, and his fellow volunteers love these videos, and they use them to decide who they're going to walk. And I have to really focus on those, because as well-meaning as the volunteer is, sometimes he can be a little traditional, a little old school in his methods. And I decline those, and then I shoot him an email and I say, okay, when you said you had to grab Bobo real quick, okay, let's talk about that, right? Because we don't want to be grabbing dogs quick as they're trying to escape the kennel. In training, we talk about throwing treats in and getting the dog away from the kennel door, entering the kennel, closing the door. And he fortunately has proven to be very coachable, and his videos have improved over time. But I have to be very careful, because he's very influential over the other volunteers. And I need to make sure that what he's representing reflects our fear-free philosophy,
Lastly, just in terms of sort of strategy, is there, do you decline or reject applications?
I honestly can't remember having done that. So I would, if I had a reason to, but I don't think, on the website, it explains what our requirements are, and it says there's a background check. So I don't think I ever have had to, although I would. And let me bounce back to the social media again real quick. One thing that I think is key is not allowing status questions via social media. So in our closed Facebook group, if a volunteer says so-and-so's off the website, where'd they go? That I remove that comment and I email the volunteer. And I say they were removed from the website because they had 2 holds, or they went to foster, or they got adopted, or whatever conversation needs to happen. But I don't allow status questions in the Facebook group, because if you're not, on Facebook all the time, which I'm not, the other volunteers are going to start answering and it can go south really fast. So I just wanted to mention that because that's a very common question that new volunteers think they can ask. And then I have to say, no, and this is why. So.
And then just some kind of logistics. What database are you using to track hours?
Logistics.
I'm assuming a lot of us are on Logistics.
I know some people love Better Impact. I've only used Logistics so far, and there's a wonderful group that meets that was extremely helpful to me when I first started. I feel like it might have been the coordinator from Dumb Friends League maybe that was running it, but it's really, it's very helpful.
Maybe, and we can check on that through the collaboration committee if the VIP is still going on. But it was a group of volunteer coordinators, managers, you name it, coming together every few months to just discuss some of the challenges and the successes. So I'm not sure if anyone know if that's still going.
I do. I know it happens every other month, and we do it virtually now through Zoom. Lauren from Denver Animal Protection does a wonderful job moderating and just making sure it's continues to go. And I also wanted to mention, if you're not familiar yet with DOVIA, which is Directors of Volunteers and Agencies, it's a wonderful organization. Last week, they had a webinar on challenging volunteer personalities. And in a couple weeks, they have one coming up for new coordinators with coming into established programs. So if you're new to this job and you're moving into an established program, you might want to look into that. I want to say it's only $50 a year, I think, and Lauren probably would know that answer too. But if you aren't familiar with Dovia yet, check it out. It's really good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Can you spell that?
Yes.
Directors?
Yes, Directors of Volunteers in Agencies. And Lauren just said, yep, DOVIA. It's an amazing resource, $50 a year for a membership.
Cool. Lauren, if folks are interested in joining the volunteer support group, can they volunteer, not support group, but group?
Yeah.
Maybe a little support too. Are they able to reach out to you?
Yeah, I'll put my email in the chat. If anyone has questions about the volunteer management professionals meetings and getting added to that, please email me directly. And then same thing for Dovia. If you guys are interested in getting plugged in, I'm on the board for Dovia, and we'll be happy to connect you with all the information on how to get plugged in.
Lastly, there's just a question about what your free trainings are you providing?
Say that again, EC.
What fear-free trainings are you?
Oh, yeah. Yep. Yes, there's a 4-hour fear-free shelters training that when we were in the midst of COVID shutdown, all of our staff members were required to take it. And at that time, we also started requiring all of our volunteers to also go through it. It's wonderful. I love it. Oh, good. Thank you, Jennifer. Jen Schwartz just put the link into the chat. And it's really good. They have all sorts of different programs, like for vet techs and even for pet owners, for like, home, fear-free homes. But it's been really valuable. And then it gives us a common language and kind of a common culture when we are talking about animal handling and why we make the decisions we do at the shelter. So.
Great. All righty. Well, we are about at our time, so I'm going to toss it over to Annalise.
And that wraps up this month's Coffee and Collaboration. Thank you so much for everyone that attended. And Kristen, we cannot thank you enough for your time and expertise. Thank you so much. Our next Coffee and Collaboration will take place on December 6th, and invites with more information will be sent out directly after today's presentation. Again, thank you for everyone that attended, and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks so much.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Kristen.
Thanks, Kristen. Think people got a lot out of that.
Yes, that was
She
awesome.
left.
She's
Okay.
gone. Yeah.
She's pretty amazing.
We talked her up,
Yeah.
Jennifer, and she delivered.
Yes.
I knew she would.
Yeah, no, it
Like
was
she could do
wonderful.
a whole like workshop.
It's really
Yeah, that was
wonderful.
great.
Awesome. Well, I'll get the recording